Okay, the minute is up, so I want to say good afternoon and welcome to another educational session of the Community Giveback Forum. And by the way, happy April Fool's Day. My name is Brad Zaba, and I am the founder of the forum. And today's promise to you is that in the next 25 minutes, you will learn the accuracy of the old saying, you can't manage what you can't measure. I'm sure many of you have heard that before. You can't manage what you can't measure. And today we're going to see how it applies in your telecom world. As an electrical engineer myself, I can tell you from experience that it really pays off to have a consistent template and also a process for measuring. This is how and where management starts. Let's review a little bit of the forum's visions, if you will. And our vision is to leave our communities in a better place than we found them. So the goal is to source business expertise that benefits our communities. And it's our mission here at the forum to bring to our community financial programs that will make a significant difference during these often chaotic times. So we go out and research these financial programs, and we had uncovered one that was unique in that it had very large applicability across organizations of almost any size. The program also was one of the quickest to implement and benefit from. And this is a huge and, this organization has done business with over 300 municipalities, in addition to countless hospitals, health centers, etc. So we thought, hey, this would be a great session to share with you today. It's a program that requires no upfront cost and has large and ongoing financial returns. So today we are joined by Shawn Krahenbuhl from Espy Services. Espy is a leader in the cleansing and optimizing of your telecom expenses. I like that, cleansing and optimizing of telecom expenses. But to give you more details, I think at this moment, it would make me feel bad because I'd be stealing the thunder from Shawn's description of how and why he got into this industry. He's going to share that with us in just a second or two. But as always, please enter any questions that you may have in the question box, and Shawn will address them in just a bit. Let me please welcome Shawn as he describes how in the world he got into this crazy business. Shawn, if you would, take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Brad. And I greatly appreciate the opportunity to come here and speak with everybody and hopefully impart a little bit of knowledge onto everyone to help you guys out in managing these telecommunications expenses, because I know in the city and towns and counties and states, it gets tricky sometimes dealing with all of that. Want to kind of start off and give you guys a little bit of background on who I am and where I've come from. And as Brad said, why I got into this. I actually started with AT&T back in 1989. And yes, I am that old, unfortunately. Unfortunately. But I started out with AT&T, and I worked in one of their inbound call centers. The inbound call centers, there were actually 3 of them in the United States at that time. And the 3 of us call centers, we handled all of the AT&T customer complaints and problems and billing errors and everything else. In those 3 call centers, we only ever spoke to 2% of the entire AT&T customer base, because that's all that who would call in. The funny thing is that a lot of times when customers would call us, they would make us aware of billing errors on their bills that we didn't even know existed. And in those particular situations, we were told, just trust and adjust it, and then we'll report it. The reporting was a thing that basically our managers sent it up to the corporate chain, and they would give us back how they were going to handle it. usually came back in one of two ways that they would handle it. They would say, one, they would say, we're going to correct the issue, and we're going to go ahead and issue credits on the accounts that were affected. The second one, this is where it gets a little interesting. The second one would be is that if they call in, if anybody calls in, we're going to correct the issue, but give them credit if they call in. In other words, we're not going to credit everybody back for this error that's out there. So as customer service agents, that was our goal, that was our job, and essentially, we don't know if it ever got credited or if it ever got corrected. The biggest thing out of this that I want you guys to understand is that 98% of AT&T's customer base, we're still paying for errors. We're still paying for those things, had paid for them, and never saw that money ever again. And, it got me to thinking a long time ago that, that just doesn't seem right. It wasn't that efficient. So I kind of got into this cost analyst business to go after telecom providers to get some of that money back for people. What I want to talk to you guys today about essentially is just going in and I want to be able to give you some examples of things. I want to talk to you about how all that works, but I want to tell you this as an example for a county that we had worked with down in Texas. Essentially, they came into us spending roughly $40,000 a month, a little bit over that, and they had no inventory. Bills were out of control. Basically, came seeking for help. So what we had done is we put together an inventory for them, and by doing so, we were able to identify a tremendous amount of errors and overcharges, state contract issues, this type of thing. Saved them $25,000, a little over $25,000 a month, right at 63.8% of their spend. We cut, and because of so many of these errors that were contract involved, in other words, they were supposed to be on contracted rates and they weren't, we were able to procure an additional $102,000 in credits. So all total for that year, we saved them a little over $402,000, which was 83.8% of their entire budget that they had previously. So this is why I am so passionate about helping you guys. I want to make sure that we can help all the communities, just like Brad said, leaving our communities in a better place than when we found them. That's really where I'm at, and I'm passionate about. I teach all my people here that so long as we take care of the client, the customer first, everything else falls into place for us. And I want to talk to you about kind of a few of the goals that we're going to go with today. As you can see here, this is Mr. Warren Buffett, and I try to live by this for all of our clients and for myself especially. Rule number one, never lose money. Rule number two, never forget rule number one. That is so important. And I know in the governmental space that budgets are tight. Tax dollars are down, those types of things. We've all seen it and heard it, and we've lived it. We don't want to hear it anymore. So what I want to do is I want to give you some steps that will help you to identify some of these billing errors. I want to go through what causes some of the billing errors, and we're going to talk a little bit about as well how to correct those errors. And that's really where we want to live today. I want to be able to deliver to you additional methods that will help you maintain a solid vendor management process. That way you can be assured that you're never paying too much and end up losing money. I want to talk to you about this. This is a pretty dramatic picture here. I'm sure most everybody has seen an iceberg example, but it is so impactful to look at our industry just like this iceberg. Where you're at at this point is most people, I should say, they live above that water line, and you guys are negotiating contracts, or you're venturing onto consortium type contracts. You're going to negotiate some rates, and you're going to check your invoices from month to month. The problem that we see a lot of times is that in processing invoices, you get into this mode of looking at this month's bill and maybe comparing it to last month's bill, or even maybe the last couple months. And as long as it's close, people are just paying those. The problem that happens or arises out of that is you've got all these things down below the surface that are affecting those invoices. And we'll get into those individually, but when you're checking your invoices month to month and comparing them month to month, there can be as low as a 1 to 2% variance, which may not seem like very much. Maybe it's only a couple dollars, but if you're going from one month to the next, that couple dollars can grow to $20, $30 over the course of a year, maybe $2,000 to $3,000 collectively. So it's very dangerous to just look at it from a month-to-month basis, and that's why we want to get into what's below the surface. As Brad mentioned at the beginning, you really cannot manage what you can't measure, right? So in order to measure, you need to understand that the customer service records are imperative to understand and know how to read, because that's where you're going to be able to find the details. That's where that's how your invoice actually is created, is through this customer service record. So when you call a vendor, for example, and you start to tell them, hey, we want to order these services, they're entering codes onto what is called a customer service record. That customer service record then in return is formatted into that vendor's billing platform. Then you get into hidden price increases. Hidden price increases are on your bills. There are notes that your vendors will leave you each month, and you have to pay very close attention to those notes, because they'll tell you about, hey, we're going to be increasing the price of this or the price of that. There are also times where you have contracts that actually allow for them to increase the prices. You have to maintain that as well. With special fees, that's going to be the type of fees where vendors try to inflate their billing. They use processing fees or paper bill fees. You'll sometimes see that on some of your invoices. Discretionary fees, those are allowed by the FCC and would include such things as like federal subscriber line charges, as well as many others. Off-contract charges, this happens when you're not aggressively monitoring your contracts. You could end up out of contract. What happens with this is that if you're not proactively renegotiating or reaching out to the vendor to say, hey, my contract's coming up, you could end up going out of contract, and your rates could spike 5, 6, 7 times what they normally would be on a contracted rate. The next piece of that is going to be new service additions. Now, oftentimes we see that when somebody calls in to add a phone line or add a particular service, they'll call in and they'll say, hey, we need to add this line. If you don't specify that you're on a contracted rate, it goes in at a much higher rate, and then you're just going to pay a higher rate and premium each month because it wasn't ever put on the contract. Inventory overcharges, again, if you're not measuring what you have, you're going to end up with extra inventory or services that you may not need. A lot of times we've seen where customers will order an extra block of 20 direct inward dial phone numbers when they've got about 500 extra ones already being paid for each month that they could have pulled from. End of contract liabilities. What we see a lot of times is a lot of the account reps that are out there, their goal is to get new contracts. That's their primary goal. And when they go to get those new contracts, oftentimes you may have a certain amount of time in your contract that if you end it early, then you end up paying what's called a shortfall penalty. I've seen this countless times. I've seen customers that have had as much as $500,000, $600,000, $800,000 worth of shortfall penalties, and they were stuck having to pay them. So it's very, very important, again, going back to the inventory side of things and making sure that you understand what services you have, where, what contracts you have, when they end, all of that. So I skipped two things, guys. I want to go back to those. The first thing I'm going to address is tariffs. Right now in our industry, tariffs are starting to become less and less of a thing, really. As we come into the internet age and get into this, you're seeing less tariffs. More tariffs are being de-tariffed. Programs and plans are starting to be grandfathered in terms of rates. When that happens, the rates for those services will skyrocket because they're no longer technically being supported by that vendor. I don't know how many of you know this, but about four and a half years ago, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, put out a statement that by the year 2025, analog copper wired lines will no longer be supported or have to be supported by telecommunications vendors. Now, there is a caveat to that. So long as the telecommunications vendor has a viable solution to replace those copper services. Well, right now, folks, these vendors are aggressively going out there to try and get everybody switched over to fiber so that they no longer have to maintain the copper. And that's kind of where we're at this moment. We've got a couple years left, a few years left before this all goes into effect. But if a vendor can viably replace the services, they no longer have to support the copper services. That's going to be very important. I know a lot of the cities and counties out there work off of legacy type systems, whether it be through PRIs or those types of things. That's what they're working off of. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about was the data entry errors. Data entry errors are the number one reason why you find errors and overcharges on your invoices. As I mentioned to you on the customer service records, that's the record that is getting entered into. The person that's doing that data entry is human, just like you and I. And we call it fat fingering, whatever you want to call it. I've had a situation where a client had actually went in and found out that they were paying all these extra charges. We went into the customer service record and identified that, well, there was an order placed on such and such a date to add all these services. When we contacted the vendor, in their notes, in their system, it was actually supposed to be for another phone number that was one digit off of our client's phone number. They had been paying this for a couple of years. I'm sure the other guy was pretty happy. He had services and wasn't paying for them. So another way to look at this whole iceberg is this triangle. And it's so similar to the iceberg, and I want to focus on the very top of that iceberg, which is number one, find errors and overcharges. This is where that top is, where most people live right now, and it's going to give you approximately 5% of savings if you really truly maintain and monitor your invoices. You're going to be able to identify slamming, cramming, tax errors, those types of things that are visible to you on the actual invoice. Now, We keep talking about what lives below the line or the water line. And that's why I want to take you to number 2. We just talked about customer service records and tariffs in there. You have to take a look consistently at your customer service records, your vendor contracts, and the tariffs, and you need to be able to triangulate all 3 of those sources against your actual invoices. That's where you're going to identify these embedded errors, whether it be non-used features, non-used services, contract terms. All of that is where you find that information. With that, you can add additional 35% of value just in that section alone. Then you move over to number 3, and that's where you get into the contracts themselves. With going through your contracts, you've got to have some resources that, maybe this group can help with that, but identifying what the lowest rates are is one thing. Identifying the best technology is another thing. The most important thing to me for all of you is having the best terms and conditions. Because without that, you have zero protection. These vendors will put together these contracts and they are 100% in their best interest, not yours. You get the benefit of the rates, but you're not going to, and I guess the technology, but you're not really going to get the benefit if something happens. I know in cities and counties as well, there can be downturn, especially in these times. That may be something that happens. But if you don't have the proper terms and conditions in that contract, you could end up paying for services even though you don't have people there to use them. So it's very important that you try to pull all of those things in there and equate them with your rates and the technology that you're looking at. I'm going to give you one example here of kind of how this can affect you guys. We worked with a local county government here in Indiana and had discovered that they were paying for an old radio tower. This radio tower was old school. It communicated to the state police up in Bloomington, Indiana, and it communicated with that state police to get license checks, warrants, etc. In our research of the inventory, we found out that the radio tower had been taken down over 10 years prior to that. Like it didn't even exist. The reciprocating state police tower had been removed 7 years prior because Indiana University had built a new baseball stadium where that police station was. So they were paying for this service for well over 10 years and not even utilizing it. They had upgraded to new digital services. We were able to procure the documentation that the tower was supposed to have been removed way back 10 years prior, and ended up being able to get them an $80,000 credit. But without going through all of this, without going through the customer service records, the contracts, the tariffs, all of that, we would not have been able to do that for them. So again, we want to make sure we're focusing on all the hidden danger so that you can get full accountability and take care of all of that, mainly for the constituents in the communities. So with all of that, and you've heard us talk about this, Brad brought it up, here it is. You can't manage what you can't measure. How do I measure it? It's right here. This inventory, or this is an example of an inventory, this is what you have to somehow get implemented as quickly as possible, because what it does for you is it identifies all of the different types of services that you have, and then you need to be able to break it down by location, and then you need to be able to break it down by what features and additional costs are being put onto that. And as you can see, and this is just a small snippet of an example, there's a tremendous amount of detail here, but it's going to give you a viewpoint that you have not ever had before. Something that rather than guessing as to whether or not you need another service, you can go to your inventory and look at it. You guys recall at the beginning of the meeting, I guess, where I talked about the customer service rep. When I was a customer service rep, again, we never knew if those issues were corrected or not, and we had no way of tracking it, or quite honestly, we really didn't care because we were taking the next call. Imagine how many of those people, if they would have had inventories, would not have had to deal with that, because they would have been tracking this from month to month. So in other words, any changes that you make, any additions that you make, it all gets reflected on your inventory. And that's where you need to live from day to day when it comes to your telecommunications expenses. It really gives you the how many, the how much, and the how long. And that's what's really the most important with all of this. I do want to talk about your taxes. Taxes get added to your account constantly. It's imperative that you guys each year file the appropriate tax forms within your given state to the vendors to make sure that they're not charging you taxes. And the last bit of this is every time you call them, they are notorious for adding taxes back onto your bill. I don't know if they have a secret hidden button or something, but it's there, and they do that. So you've got to maintain and watch that monthly. So with that, I greatly appreciate your guys' time. I hope this was helpful to everybody. I'll turn it back over to you, Brad.
Well, we have, if we can answer one question, because it came in, or different versions of it came in a couple of times. And the question was, we purchased our services and equipment from a state contract. Doesn't that really address most, if not all, of these issues? If you can speak very briefly to that, and we appreciate it.
Yes, that's a great question, and I can answer it by taking you back to the iceberg. It's great that you're able to participate in that state contract, and while some states are better at it than others, it still only addresses the top of that iceberg. What it does not address is the garbage in, garbage out in telecom billing platforms. So while you may be getting a decent rate, keystroke errors, inventory overcharges, new service additions, and even customer service record errors, it doesn't change how those errors occur. And additionally, you may now also be paying a premium rate to be on the state contract. Great question.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll tell you what. No, we do appreciate it, and what we would like to do is we would like to follow up with you. Please, we have your names and for the attendees and emails and so on, and would tell you that what we're going to do is be in touch with Shawn. If there's any additional questions, please send them in. I have a couple of here that we didn't get a chance to answer. We can put those on the forum. The second thing is, Shawn would be more than happy to make himself available for 20 or 25 minutes or so to address your specific environment as we move forward with this. And so I really do appreciate it, and say that this is one of probably the quickest and the most applicable money saving operation that you can move down the path, because it just seems that these problems are everywhere across, as you said, probably about 98% of the cities and towns out there. So in 2 weeks, we're going to have another session, which is, I believe, if today's the 1st, that would make it the 15th. And that is to learn how to uncover wasted dollars in your utility bills. You're starting to see a pattern here, and that's on purpose. And that is what we are trying to do, is bring you services and knowledge so that you can uncover where your money is not being used efficiently. So we appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Thank you so much again, Shawn. And we appreciate your time. We'll be in touch with everybody involved today. Have a wonderful April Fool's Day. Have a great holiday weekend, and we'll be in touch with you shortly. Thanks.